By the kindness of your heart have you been deceived, O king, he said. Your son has married a girl who has lost a hand. Do you know why she lost it? She was a witch and has wedded 3 husbands, and each husband she has put to the great beyond with her dark arts. Then the people of the town cut off her hand and turned her into the forest. And what I say is true, for her town is my town also.
An old couple once lived in a hut under a grove of a palm tree with their 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were all very happy together for many years. And then the father became very ill and firmly believed that the time to meet his ancestors had come. He called his children to the place where he lay on the floor and, starting with his son, said, I have no herds of cattle to leave you as an inheritance, only a few things in the house. For I am a poor man, as you know. But choose, will you have my blessing or my property? Your property, certainly, answered the son, and his father nodded. And you? Asked the old man of the girl who stood by her brother. I will have your blessings, she answered, and her father gave her much blessings. That night, the man passed on to meet his ancestors, and his wife, son, and daughter mourned him for 7 days, and gave him a burial according to the custom of his people. But hardly were the time of mourning over, then the mother was attacked by a disease that was common in their country at that time. I am going away from you, she said to her children in a faint voice. But first, my son, choose, which will you have, blessings or property? Property, certainly, answered the son. And you, my daughter? I will have blessing, said the girl, and her mother gave her much blessing, and that night she too passed on. When the days of mourning for their mother were over, the brother asked his sister to put outside the hut all that belonged to their father and mother. So the girl put everything in the hut out, and the boy took them away, save only a small pot and a vessel in which the girl could clean her corn. But unfortunately, she had no corn to clean. She sat at home, sad and hungry, when a neighbor knocked at the door. My pot has cracked in the fire. Lend me yours to cook my supper in, and I will give you a handful of corn in return, the neighbor said. The girl was glad and obliged the neighbor immediately. That night, she was able to have good supper herself from this exchange, and the next day, another woman borrowed her pot, and then another and another, for never were pot accidents as rife in that village like that period. She soon grew quite fat with all the corn she earned with the help of her pot, and then one evening she picked up a pumpkin seed in a corner and planted it near her well, and it sprung up and gave her many pumpkins. At last, it happened that a youth from her village passed through the place where the girl's brother was, and the two met and talked. What news is there of my sister? Asked the young man, with whom things had gone very badly, for he was idle and could barely feed himself. She is fat, doing well and well liked, replied the youth, for the women borrow her mortar to clean their corn, and borrow her pot to cook in it, and for all this trouble, they gave her more food than she can eat, and he went his way. Now the brother was filled with envy at the words of the man, and he set out at once, and before dawn he had reached the hut and saw the pot and the mortar were standing outside. He slung them over his shoulders and departed, pleased with his own cleverness. But when his sister awoke and sought for the pot to cook her corn for the breakfast, she could not find it anywhere. At length, she said to herself, well, some thief must have stolen them while I slept. I will go and see if any of my pumpkins are ripe. And indeed they were, and so many that the tree was almost broken by their weight. So she ate what she wanted and took the others to the villagers and gave them in exchange for corn. And the women said that no pumpkins were as sweet as hers, and she was to bring them for sale every day. In this way, she earned more than she needed for herself and soon was able to get another mortar and cooking pot in exchange for her corn. She then thought she was quite rich, for she had all that she needed. Unfortunately, someone else thought so too, and this was her brother's wife, who had heard all about the pumpkin tree and sent her slave with a handful of grains to exchange for a pumpkin. At first, the girl told the slave that so few pumpkins were left that she could not spare any. But when she found that he belonged to her brother, she changed her mind and went out to the tree and gathered the largest and the ripest that were there. Take this one, she said to the slave, and carry it back to your mistress. But tell her to keep the corn, as the pumpkin is a gift. The brother's wife was overjoyed at the sight of the fruit, and when she tasted it, she declared it was the nicest she had ever eaten. Indeed, all night she thought of nothing else, and early in the morning she called another slave, for she was a rich woman, and bade him go and ask for another pumpkin. But the girl, who had just been out to look at her tray, told him that they were all eaten, so he went back empty-handed to his mistress. In the evening, her husband returned from hunting a long way off and found his wife in tears. What is the matter? He inquired. I sent a slave with some grain to your sister to buy some pumpkins, but she would not sell me any and told me there were none, though I knew she let other people buy them. Well, never mind. Now go to sleep, he said, and tomorrow I will go and pull up the pumpkin tree as punishment for treating you so badly. So, before sunrise, he got up and set out for his sister's house and found her cleaning some corn. Why did you refuse to sell my wife a pumpkin yesterday when she wanted one? He asked. The old ones are finished and the new ones are not yet ripe, answered the girl. When her slave arrived 2 days ago, there were only 4 left, but I gave him one and would take no corn for it. I do not believe you. You have sold them to other people. I shall go and cut down the pumpkin, cried her brother in a rage. If you cut down the pumpkin, you shall cut off my hand with it, exclaimed the girl, running up to her tray and catching hold of it. But her brother followed, and with one swing of his cutlass, cut off the pumpkin and her hand too. Then he went into the house and took away everything he could find, and sold the house to a friend of his who had long wished to have it, and his sister had no home to go to. Frustrated, the girl baited her wounded arm carefully, applied some healing leaves that grew nearby to it, and wrapped a cloth round the leaves. After this, she went to hide in the forest so that her brother might not find her again. For 7 days, she wandered about, eating only the fruits that hung from the trees above her, and every night she climbed up and tucked herself safely among the creepers, which bond together around big branches so that neither lions nor tigers nor panthers might get at her. When she woke up on the 7th morning, she saw from where she had hidden smoke coming up from a little town on the edge of the forest. The sight of the hut made her feel more lonely and helpless than before. She longed desperately for a drink of milk, for she was very thirsty. But how was she to earn anything with only one hand? And at this thought, her courage failed, and she began to cry bitterly. It happened that the king's son had come out from the town very early to shoot birds, and when the sun grew hot, he felt tired. I will lie here and rest under this tree, he said to his attendants. You can go and shoot instead, and I will just have this slave to stay with me. Away they went, and the young man fell asleep, and slept long. Suddenly, he was awoken by something wet and salty falling on his face. What is that? Is it raining? He said to his slave. Go and look. No, master, it's not raining, answered the slave. Then climb up the tree and see what it is. And the slave climbed up and came back and told his master that a beautiful girl was sitting up there, and that it must have been her tears which had fallen on your face. Why was she crying? Inquired the prince. I cannot tell. I did not dare to ask her, but perhaps she would tell you. And the master, greatly wondering, climbed up the tree. What is the matter with you? He asked her gently, but she only sobbed louder. He continued, Are you a woman or a spirit of the woods? I am a woman, she answered slowly, wiping her eyes with a leaf of the creeper that hung about her head. Then why do you cry? He persisted. I have many things to cry for, she replied, more than you could ever guess. Come home with me, said the prince. It's not very far. Come home to my father and mother. I am a king's son. Then why are you here? She said, opening her eyes and staring at him. Once every month, I and my friends shoot bears in the forest, he answered. But I was tired and bade them leave me to rest. And you, what are you doing up in this tree? At that she began to cry again, and told the king's son all that had befallen her since the passing of her mother. I cannot come down with you, for I do not like anyone to see me, she ended with a sob. Oh, I will manage all that, said the king's son, and swinging himself to a lower branch, he bade his slave go quickly into the town and bring back with him 4 strong men and a curtained carriage. When the man was gone, the girl climbed down and hid herself on the ground in some bushes. Very soon, the slave returned with the curtained carriage, which was placed on the ground close to the bushes where the girl lay hidden. Now go, all of you, and call my friends and attendants, for I do not wish to stay here any longer, he said to the men, and as soon as they were out of sight, he bade the girl get into the carriage and fasten the curtains tightly. Then he got in on the other side and waited till his attendants came up. What is the matter, O son of the king? The attendants asked, breathless. I think I'm ill. I'm cold, he said, and sailing to the barriers, he drew the curtains and was carried through the forest right inside his own house. Tell my father and mother that I have a fever and I want some spicy food, he said, and bid them send it quickly. So the slave hastened to the king's palace and gave his message, which troubled both the king and queen greatly. A pot of hot spicy food was instantly prepared and carried over to the sick prince. And as soon as the council which he was presiding was over, the king and his ministers went to pay him a visit, bearing a message from the queen that she would follow a little later. Now, the prince had pretended to be ill in order to soften his parents' hearts, and the next day he declared that he felt better, and getting into his carriage, was carried to the palace ceremoniously, drums being beaten all along the way. He dismounted at the foot of the steps and walked up, a great umbrella being held over his head by a slave. Then he entered the cool, dark room where his father and mother were sitting and said to them, I saw a girl yesterday in the forest whom I wish to marry, and unknowing to my attendants, I brought her back to my house in a carriage. Give me your consent, I beg of you, for no other woman pleases me as she does, even though she has but only one hand. Of course, the king and queen would have preferred a daughter-in-law with 2 hands and one who could have brought riches with her, but they could not bear to say no to their son, so they told him it should be as he chose, and that the wedding feast should be prepared immediately. The girl could scarcely believe her good fortune, and in gratitude for all the kindness shown her, was so useful and pleasant to her husband's parents that they soon loved her. Not long after, a baby was born to her, and soon after that, the prince was sent on a journey by his father to visit some of the distant towns of the kingdom and to set right things that had gone wrong. No sooner had he started on this journey than the girl's brother, who had wasted all the riches his own wife had brought him in recklessness and folly, and was now very poor, chanced to come into the town. And as he passed, he heard a man say, do you know that the king's son has married a woman who has lost one of her hands? On hearing these words, the brother stopped and asked, where did he find such a woman? In the forest, answered the man, and the cruel brother guessed at once that it must be his sister. A great rage took possession of his soul as he thought of his sister, whom he had tried to ruin, being after all so much better off than himself, and he vowed that he would work towards her downfall, no matter what. That very afternoon, he made his way to the palace and asked to see the king. When he was admitted to his presence, he knelt and touched the ground with his forehead, and the king asked him to stand up and tell him what had brought him to his palace. By the kindness of your heart have you been deceived, O king, he said. Your son has married a girl who has lost a hand. Do you know why she lost it? She was a witch and has wedded 3 husbands, and each husband she put up to the great beyond with her dark arts. Then the people of the town cut off her hand and turned her into the forest, and what I say is true, O king, for her town is my town also. The king listened and his face grew dark. Unfortunately, he had a quick temper and did not stop to reason. Instead of sending men to the town where his daughter-in-law came from and seeking to talk to people who knew her, he believed of the brothers' lying words and made the queen believe them too. Together, they discussed what they should do, and in the end, they decided that they would put her out of the town, but this did not satisfy the brother. Eliminate her, he said. It is no more than she deserved for daring to marry the king's son. Then she can do no more hurt to anyone. We cannot eliminate her, they answered. If we do, our son would also eliminate us. Let us do as the others did and put her out of the town. And with this, the envious brother was forced to be content. The poor girl loved her child and her husband very much, and as long as she had her baby with her, she did not very much mind anything. So taking up her baby and hanging a little earthen pot for cooking round her neck, she left her house with its great peacock fans and slaves and seats of ivory and plunged into the forest. For a while she walked, not knowing where she went. Then she grew tired and sat under a tree to rest and to hush her baby to sleep. Suddenly, she raised her eyes and saw a snake wrangling from under the bushes towards her. I am a gone woman, she said to herself, and stayed quite still, for indeed she was too frightened to move. In another minute, the snake had reached her side, and to her surprise, it spoke. Open your earthen pot and let me go in. Save me from sun, and I will save you from rain. And she opened the pot, and when the snake had slipped in, she put on the cover. Soon, she beheld another snake coming after the other one. When it had reached her, it stopped and said, Did you see a small grey snake pass this way just now? Yes, she answered. It was going very quickly. Ah, I must hurry and catch it up, replied the second snake, and he hastened on. When it was out of sight, a voice from the pot said, Uncover me. She lifted the lid. The little grey snake slid rapidly to the ground. I am safe now, it said. But tell me, where are you going? I cannot tell you, for I do not know, she answered. I am just wandering in the woods. Follow me, and let us go home together, said the snake. And the girl followed it through the forest and along the green path till they came to a great lake, where they stopped to rest. The sun is hot, said the snake, and you have walked far. Take your baby and bathe in the cool place where the branches of the tree stretch far over the water. Yes, I will, she answered, and they went in. The baby splashed and laughed with delight, and then it gave a sprung and fell right in, down, 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 and his mother could not find him, though she searched all among the reeds. Full of terror, she made her way back to the bank and called to the snake. My baby is gone. He is drowned, and never shall I see him again. She called out tearfully. Go in once more, said the snake, and feel everywhere, even among the trees that have their roots in the water. Perhaps he may be held fast there. Swiftly, she went back and felt everywhere, with her whole hand, even putting her fingers in the tiniest crannies where a crab could hardly have taken shelter. No, he is not here, she cried. How am I to live without him? But the snake took no notice and only answered, Put in your other arm too. What is the use of that? She asked, when it has no hand to feel with. But all the same, she did as she was told, and in an instant, the wounded arm touched something round and soft, laying between two stones in a clump of reeds. My baby, she shouted, and lifted him up, merry and laughing and not a bit hurt or frightened. Have you found him this time? Asked the snake. Yes, oh yes, she answered. And why? I have gotten my hand back again. And from sheer joy, she burst into tears. The snake let her wait for a little while, and then he said, Now we will journey to my family, and we will all repay you for the kindness you've shown to me. You have done more than enough in giving me back my hand, replied the girl, but the snake only smiled. Be quick before the sun sets, he answered and began to wriggle along so fast that the girl could hardly follow him. Eventually, they arrived at the house in a tree, where the snake lived with its father and mother when it was not traveling. And he told them all its adventures and how it had escaped from its enemy. The father and mother snake could not do enough to show their gratitude, They made their guest lie down on a mat, woven of strong creepers that hung from branch to branch, till she was quite rested after her wanderings. While they washed the baby and gave him milk to drink from the coconut which they persuaded their friends, the monkeys, to crack for them. They even managed to carry small fruits tied up in their tails for the baby's mother, who felt at last that she was safe and at peace. Not that she forgot her husband, for she often thought of him and longed to show him their son. And in the night, she would sometimes lie awake and wonder where he was. In this manner, many weeks passed by, and what was the prince doing? Well, he had fallen very ill when he was on the farthest border of the kingdom, and he was nursed by some kind people who did not know who he was, and that the king and queen heard nothing about him. When he was better, he made his way back home again and into his father's palace, where he found a strange man standing behind the throne with the peacock's feather. This was his wife's brother, whom the king had taken into high favor, though, of course, the prince was quite ignorant of what had happened. For a moment, the king and queen stared at their son as if he had been unknown to them. He had grown so thin and weak during his illness that his shoulders were bowed like those of an old man. "Have you forgotten me so soon?" he asked. At the sound of his voice, they gave a cry and ran towards him, and poured out questions as to what had happened, and why he looked like that. But the prince did not answer any of them. "How is my wife?" he said. There was a pause. Then the queen replied, "She has passed on." "Passed on?" he repeated, stepping a little backward. "And my child?" "He is late too." The young man stood silent. Then he said, "Show me their final resting place." At these words, the king, who had been feeling rather uncomfortable, took heart again, for he had prepared two beautiful tombs for his son to see, so that he might never ever guess what had been done to his wife. All these months, the king and queen had been telling each other how good and merciful they had been not to take her brother's advice and terminate her life. But now, this somehow did not seem so certain. Then the king led the way to the courtyard, just behind the palace, and through the gate into a beautiful garden where stood two splendid tombs in a green space under the trees. The prince advanced alone, and resting his head against the stone, he burst into tears. His father and mother stood silently behind him, with a curious pang in their souls, which they did not quite understand. Could it be that they were ashamed of themselves? But after a while, the prince turned around and walked past them into the palace. He bade the slaves bring him morning ash for 7 days. No one saw him, but at the end of them, he went out hunting and helped his father rule his people. Only no one dared to speak to him of his wife and son. At last, one morning, after the girl had been laying awake all night thinking of her husband, she said to her friend, the snake, "You have all shown me much kindness, but now I am well again. I want to go home and hear some news of my husband, and if he still mourns for me." Now the heart of the snake was sad as her was, but he only said, "Yes, so it must be. Go and bid farewell to my father and mother. But if they offer you a present, see that you take nothing but my father's ring and my mother's casket." So she went to the parent snakes, who wept bitterly at the thought of losing her, and offered her gold and jewels as much as she could carry in remembrance of them. But the girl shook her head and pushed the shiny heap away from her. "I shall never forget you, never," she said in a broken voice. "But the only tokens I will accept from you are the little rings and these old caskets." The two snakes looked at each other in dismay. The ring and the casket were the only things they did not want her to have. Then, after a short pause, they spoke. "Why did you want the ring and casket so much? Who has told you of them?" "Oh, nobody. It is just my fancy," she answered. But the old snakes shook their heads and replied, "Not so. It is our son who told you. And as he said, so it must be. If you need food or clothes or a house, tell the ring, and it will find them for you. And if you are unhappy or in danger, tell the casket, and it will set things right." Then they both gave her their blessings, and she picked up her baby and went her way. She walked for a long time, till at length she came near the town where her husband and his father dwelt. Here, she stopped under a grove of palm trees and told the ring that she wanted a house. "It is ready, mistress," whispered a queer little voice which made her jump, and looking behind her, she saw a lovely palace made of the finest wood and a row of slaves with tall fans bowing before the door. She entered into the house gladly, for she was very tired, and after eating a good supper of fruit and milk which she found in one of the rooms, she flung herself down on a pile of cushion and went to sleep with her baby beside her. Here, she stayed quietly, and every day the baby grew taller and stronger, and very soon he could run about and even talk. Of course, the neighbors had a great deal to say about the house, which had been built so quickly, so very quickly on the outskirts of the town, and invented all kinds of stories about the rich lady who lived in it. Eventually, when the king returned with his son from the wars, some of these tales reached his ears. "It is really very odd about that house under the palms," he said to the queen. "I must find out something of that lady, whom no one ever sees. I believe it is not a lady at all, but a gang of conspirators who want to take possession of my throne. Tomorrow, I shall take my son and my chief ministers and insist on getting inside." Soon after sunrise the next day, the prince's wife was standing on a little hill behind the house when she saw a cloud of dust coming through the town. A moment afterward, she heard faintly the roll of the drums that announced the king's presence, and saw a crowd of people approaching the grove of palms. Her heart beat fast. Could her husband be among them? In any case, they must not discover her there. So, just bidding the ring to prepare some food for them, she ran inside and bound a veil of gold around her head and face. Then, taking the child's hand, she went to the door and waited. In a few minutes, the whole procession came up, and she stepped forward and begged them to come in and rest. "Willingly," answered the king. "Go first, and we will follow you." They followed her into a long dark room in which was a table covered with gold cups and baskets filled with dates and coconut and all kinds of ripe yellow fruits. And the king and the prince sat upon cushions and were served by slaves, while the ministers, among whom she recognized her own brother, stood behind. "Ah, I owe all my misery to him," she said to herself. "From the first day he has hated me, but outwardly she showed nothing." And when the king asked her what news there was in the town, she only answered, "You have ridden far. Eat first and drink, for you must be very hungry and thirsty, and then I will tell you my news." "You spoke sense," answered the king, and silence prevailed for some time longer. Then he said, "Now, lady, I have finished, and I am refreshed. Therefore, tell me, I pray you, who you are and where did you come from? But first, be seated." She bowed her head and sat down on a big scarlet cushion, drawing her little boy, who was asleep in a corner, onto her knee, and began to tell the story of her life. As her brother listened, he would have left the house and hidden himself in the forest, but it was his duty to wave the fan of peacock's feathers over the king's head to keep off the flies, and he knew he would be seized by the royal guards if he tried to desert his post. He must stay where he was. There was no help for it. And luckily for him, the king was too interested in the tale to notice that the fan had ceased moving and that flies were dancing right on top of his thick coily hair. The story went on, but the storyteller never once looked at the prince, even through her veil, though he, on his side, never moved his eyes from her. When she reached the part where she had sat weeping in the tree, the king's son could no longer restrain himself. "It is my wife," he cried, springing to where she sat with the sleeping child in her lap. "They have lied to me, and you are not diseased after all, nor the boy either. But what has happened? Why did they lie to me? And why did you leave my house where you were safe?" And he turned and looked fiercely at his father. "Let me finish my tale first, and then you will know," she answered, throwing back her veil. And she told everyone how her brother had come to the palace and accused her of being a witch and had tried to persuade the king to slay her. But he would not do that. She continued softly. "And after all, if I had stayed on in your house, I should never have met the snake, nor have got my hand back again. So let us forget all about it and be happy once more. For see, our son is growing quite fast and is now a big boy. And what shall be done to your brother? Asked the king, who was glad to think that someone had acted in his matter worse than himself. Put him out of the town, she answered. This was done, and the poor wicked materialistic brother was once again poor and homeless, and the good contented girl lived happily ever after with her husband, the prince, and eventually became the queen of all the kingdom in due course.